Hi, my name is Thomas Alnutt, and I'm doing my midterm on Franklin D. Roosevelt's Pearl Harbor Address to the Nation that was delivered on December 8th in 1941 in Washington, D.C. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan, Franklin D. Roosevelt. Many speeches delivered by famous people throughout the world have been analyzed for the significance that they have made on the world today. In my evaluation of this famous speech given by Franklin D. Roosevelt, I will include three important components. The first component is the historical context of this speech. The second component is analyzing the difference between public speaking techniques that were used, and three, the last component is which emotions were evoked and how exactly Franklin Roosevelt was able to tap into these emotions. Franklin Roosevelt's speech has great historical meaning to the United States of America. There were many reasons why this speech is particular mattered. Within this speech, President Roosevelt asked Congress to declare war on Japan. They have been edging toward a war for years and years, so President Roosevelt used this attack on America's soil to ask for Congress to finally go through with declaring the war. According to History.com, on December 8, 1941, Congress declared war on Japan. This speech has been important speech throughout American history for many reasons. One, the first reason is that this speech, along with its attack, allowed the United States to enter into World War II 2 years after the Pearl Harbor attacks. This speech is one for the history books because it was wrote for the American people to get them to stand together to fight back for the terrible tragedy that had occurred. There were many different public speaking techniques Franklin Roosevelt used in order to get his message across. The first technique Roosevelt used, according to Andrew Dugan's speech analyzes, was using emotional words all throughout his entire speech. Roosevelt used vivid and harsh words to get his points across to directly tap into the American emotional level. He changed the context of his speech by using these words to provoke Americans and agreeing with what he's saying based off their emotions, the tragedy, and that had just occurred. Suddenly and deliberately attacked and unprovoked and dastardly are only a few of the strong emotional words Franklin Roosevelt chooses to use while addressing the Congress in the United States. The second public speaking technique I noticed Franklin D. Roosevelt used was using repetitive words. Throughout the whole speech, Roosevelt used particular words to continually repeat so that they would become the same words heard over and over by anyone listening. One word that he used continuously was deliberately. He chooses the word to explain to Americans that this attack on us was well thought out weeks before the attack actually happened. He wanted Americans to know that this was a planned attack and not something that the American government had any idea was going to happen. Another word he used repeatedly was Japanese. Although he used different forms of the word, he still used the same words in the same context over and over and over throughout the whole speech. He did this because he wanted the Americans to know exactly who was involved in planning the defenseless attack on America. The last technique that Franklin Roosevelt used in his address was emphasizes on words and placing pauses and sentences in the right place. He places great emphasis on the words that Americans would take personally and be most effective. Franklin Roosevelt strategically placed emphasis before and after words or phrases he wanted to have the most impact. Throughout Franklin Roosevelt's speech, there were many emotions that were evoked by the message of speech. One emotion that was evoked was sadness. This emotion really came on while listening to his speech because many Americans' lives were lost due to this attack for another country. It is sad when our country becomes a victim of this type of terrorism. Since this attack was so unexpected, many Americans felt sad for themselves and our government that we allowed ourselves to be vulnerable for this opportunity that happened. Another emotion that was evoked was hatred. There were a lot of hatred towards the Japanese for attacking Pearl Harbor. From Franklin Roosevelt's speech and all the techniques and the choice of the words led Americans to hate the Japanese government for causing this deliberate act of violence on us. Another emotion that Franklin Roosevelt evoked was salutary. He used phrases and words to describe a togetherness that the country needed to follow in order to stand up to those other countries that just attacked us for no reason. He wanted to install in America a sense of strength and pride we needed to have together. At this time, many Americans had sorrow and very grief-stricken. He wanted to evoke the emotion that now was the time to come together and fight as a country for what was right. The audience that Franklin Roosevelt gave this speech to was Congress. Within this audience, he had figures who have been increasingly aware of disagreements that had been occurring with Japan for years. Throughout the speech, the whole room was still and quiet and tuned into what Roosevelt was saying. At this point in time, the audience was most likely still in disbelief about what had just happened to our country. Many were confused and very sad, and they were sitting there apart and knowing forever they would be a part of history. Franklin Roosevelt's speech had a great impact on me. I was clearly not alive when this attack happened, but this speech brought me back to when 9/11 happened. I remember exactly where I was and what I was doing the day or the attack, and as well as sitting home and listening to George Bush deliver his speech about the horrific attacks. This speech was given by Franklin Roosevelt, brought back all the emotions that I had felt on the day of 9/11. When the day of 9/11 happened, my first emotion was fear. I was fearful for what had just happened to our country. It was confusing and annoying of all the details, so that made me fear as to what if there were more attacks to come. The second emotion I felt was sadness. I felt bad for all the people that have had sacrificed their lives unwillingly for our country. Another emotion I felt while watching this speech was disgust. I felt disgusted with the way others have no remorse or feelings for another human being in life. In conclusion, there were many different things Franklin Roosevelt did throughout his speech to get his message across. This was a terrible attack on U.S. soil that needed to be handled properly. Franklin Roosevelt used his speech wisely in order to get all Americans in Congress together to declare war on a country that has viciously bombed and terrorized us. Thank you.